Hello, welcome. My name is Mara Koffmann, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Braintrust. We are a platform where parents can connect with certified teachers and learning specialists for private tutoring support. Today, I'm here with Dr. Amy Norris-Brilliant, who is a neuropsychologist who works at Mount Sinai, and I'm going to pass it over to her to introduce herself a little bit further and give some more details about her background.
Hi, I am Amy Brilliant. I am the clinical director of the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai's Division of ADHD, Learning Disabilities and Related Disorders. We help kids with all sorts of developmental and academic deficits. We give neuropsychological evaluations. We help with parent training. We help with organizational and executive functioning training. And we really try to help not just the child, but the whole family when there's a deficit in either executive functioning or some sort of learning difficulty.
And today we want to talk more specifically about those executive function skills, because I think that the challenges that students face with the transition to remote learning are significant. And I'm sure that, the amount of support that families also need in supporting their kids who have those challenges are much more common now. So can you tell us a little bit more about the incidence of ADHD in the US and how many of those students also struggle with executive function skills?
So according to the CDC, the incidence of children in the US is about 9.4%. There are 388,000 children ages 2 to 5 years who've been diagnosed with ADHD, about 2.5 million sort of that school age, ages 6 to 11, and 3.3 million adolescents aged 12 to 17 with ADHD. Boys are far more likely to be diagnosed than girls. So the incidence in boys is 12.9%. It's about 5.5% in girls. I'm not sure, honestly, that there's really so much more ADHD for boys than girls, but it does present very differently in girls. So a lot of them do get overlooked.
Mm-hmm. And in what ways does it present differently?
So girls tend to be less of the hyperactive type, less of the disruptive type. They tend to be more of the dreamers or the people who get called absent-minded professors. So, they're not a problem for other people. So they tend to get overlooked a bit more.
Mm-hmm. And, in my own personal experience working with students, so many of those kids, the absent-mindedness or sort of like the checking out is very much connected to struggles with, not only attention and focus, but executive function skills. But again, it just seems like they're spacey. And so it's, they do definitely get overlooked all the time. So, with the diagnoses that you do, how often does executive function deficits come hand in hand with ADHD?
Well, they are some of the criteria for ADHD. So I think it's actually more of the opposite question. How many kids who aren't diagnosed with ADHD are struggling with some of these things like planning, flexibility, time management, even if they can pay attention while they're in class?
Mm-hmm. And so how frequently do you think those executive function skills are struggles who don't have a diagnosis then?
That's a really good question. I think it affects a lot more kids than we think.
Mm-hmm. And with what are some of those, specific skills or specific things that students struggle with that can be a signal for parents that their child isn't just like lazy or their child isn't, not working hard enough? What are those sort of features that are really good markers that in fact they are executive function deficits?
So, when you have a child who's 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, they're not lazy. Mm-hmm. So if that's a key word, that says to me, there's an issue here. Mm-hmm. No child wants to do poorly. No child wants their parents and teachers to be upset with them. So if I hear that someone's lazy, I automatically think that there's an issue of some kind. If they're avoiding work, why are they avoiding it? Is it because it's hard? Is it because there's some underlying reason why it's hard? If they are not doing their work, is it because they can't sit down and focus long enough to do it? The other things that we look for are parents will say, we were going over addition facts, multiplication facts, and he knew it yesterday, and he knew it the day after, but today it's as if he's never heard the concept before. So those are definitely some of the things that we see. We also see he can't sit in his seat. She's got ants in her pants. She seems to understand if you ask her that there has to be a punctuation and capitalization, but when she writes more than one sentence, it's just one long sentence. Mm-hmm. So, and also the other thing that we hear a lot are careless mistakes. So those careless errors, that could be an indication that something's happening as well.
Yeah. And what exactly causes issues with these sorts of skills? What is happening in the brain that leads to some of these challenges?
It's a good question. So the frontal lobe of the brain, which is the brain's manager, tells us what to pay attention to, what to ignore, how to plan, how to organize, how to problem solve, does not really fully start to develop until age 8. And for girls, it continues to develop until age 18. And for boys, it continues to develop until about age 24. So it's important for people to know that what a person looks like at age 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, even 12 is not necessarily what they're going to look like as an adult. Mm-hmm. But, what can happen is that the frontal lobe of the brain isn't activated the way the other portions of the brain are. And it needs something to kickstart it, be that it needs a few more years to grow and develop. Maybe it needs something to stimulate it, to get it working. But it's all in that frontal lobe of the brain.
Mm-hmm. And so are there cases where you'll say to families, just, sort of wait and see what happens, just because the child's really young and, that part of the brain is still developing, maybe hasn't kicked in as strongly, as opposed to, recommending some sort of more specific treatments? Is that sort of an age-based recommendation?
I think it's really a functionality-based recommendation. So if you have a kid who's 4, 5, or 6, and they are running out of the classroom, or parents will say, they're running into traffic and I'm afraid and it's dangerous. Mm-hmm. Even if they're 4, 5, and 6, if there's a situation where it's dangerous on a regular basis, then we're going to try to recommend that it get treated right away. A big time when people come in for treatment is 3rd grade. In 3rd grade, the expectations get much higher. You also have to work much more independently. You have to produce a lot more work. And this is also coincidentally when kids roughly turn age 8, 9. Mm-hmm. So you really start to notice the difference in people's trajectories who have the working frontal lobe when it starts to take off in 3rd grade, and the kids whose frontal lobes aren't starting to take off yet. Another big period when we notice this is 6th grade. So maybe a kid was diagnosed with ADHD, inattentive type or hyperactive type, but they're able to learn and they're not super disruptive in the classroom. So we say, okay, let's keep an eye on it. Things could be better for them, but they're not terrible. So let's keep an eye on it. We'll try some behavioral interventions. We'll see what can happen. Mm-hmm. And then once you get into middle school and classes are departmentalized and you're responsible for bringing your own books from room to room, different teachers have different expectations. So there's a lot of transitions, even when you're doing your homework, keeping track of who goes to what, where. That's another period when people might say, okay, it was working before, but now it's too much and it's not working now. Yeah. Another big period is the change into high school, where the workload just gets that much heavier. Mm-hmm. So it's really less about age and more about functionality. And can this person function in the world? Can they take in the information that they need to take in so that they're learning? And can they be safe?
Yeah, and I think that really mirrors a lot of the advice from a lot of the other doctors we've spoken with about how parents can decide if and when it's time to address an issue with the help of a professional, is how much a child's difficulties are impacting their day-to-day success and their relationships at home, their relationships at school, and also their confidence more generally. because I think, for so many, if you again get that feedback of like you're lazy or you're not trying hard enough, and you're trying, the child is actually trying really hard, they just don't have the skills to be able to overcome what they're having difficulty with. The impact of that on a child's self-esteem and the family dynamics can be so hard. So I think those transitions in learning and in development are really, really helpful to keep in mind. And I think that also is a nice segue into the challenges that families are facing now, because, the amount of independence and the increase in expectations in that third grade transition and the middle school transition and the high school transition are already significant. But of course, as more and more children are learning remotely, and there are so many more expectations for independent work and time management, task management, all of the above. Have you seen an increase in families seeking support during this time?
So we see a couple of things that's really interesting. For some kids, what we have seen is that remote learning works, oddly enough, really well, because it's not distracting to them. There's nobody else in the room. There's no other people are on mute. So, and, they've set up their own workspace, maybe in a room where there's not lots of things on the wall. So they're really able to focus on the lesson more. And that is surprisingly a good chunk of kids. The other chunk of kids are kids who this is just a disaster for them. Each day, there are some schools where the schedule changes by each day, and whose class do I have to log into at which time? And it becomes really overwhelming, especially for the kids who are younger and who have parents who both work. Being able to navigate that is hard. Also, it's really hard, as you can see just now, it's really hard to make a connection when somebody is talking to you through this sort of medium. So kids who have trouble paying attention to begin with and maybe do best through project-based learning or learning by doing, this is a really hard medium for that. So their attention issues may be exacerbated. The kids who need to move, you can move around in a classroom or you can take strategic breaks. But here, if you're moving around and you can't see the computer screen or the teacher can't see you, it becomes a big challenge. The other challenge is, at least in the New York City public schools, almost every kid comes home with a folder and there's homework in the folder. They do the homework, it goes back into their folder, it gets to school for the most part. There are some kids that even is a challenge, but for the most part, just really helpful. But now they do their work, they have to scan it. They then have to figure out whose classroom it has to be scanned to. Is it my music teacher? Is it my ELA teacher? Is it my math teacher? And so it becomes this whole other organizational issue. We also find that people who maybe poo-pooed teachers before and would say, my kid's fine at home. I don't know, it must be a bad teacher. It must be a bad match. Suddenly they're having to do this academic work with their kid and they say, oh,
I get it.
Now I see what the teacher is talking about.
Yeah, I think that from what we have seen, I've definitely had some students that fall into that former camp of saying, remote learning is actually easier. Also because of the lack of transitions during the school day, that they don't have to keep track of materials. They don't have the issue of forgetting things for a class or forgetting things at home versus school because they're working at their desk all the time where everything's so centrally located. But I definitely also see the other side of kids needing to learn all of these new platforms and, third graders needing to figure out how to use Google Classroom and Seesaw and all of these other things to track assignments and submit work. And I think so often what we sometimes overlook is the fact that some of these kids actually need direct instruction in how to use these platforms rather than simply assuming that they're going to figure it out or it makes sense to them because it's intuitive, because sometimes it isn't. So I think that, there seem to be definite sort of strategies and resources that we can recommend to families to overcome some of these challenges. But, are there any sort of specific recommendations that you have been making to the children that you see or the parents that are supporting them?
So one of the things that I say a lot to parents is, if you have a younger child, an elementary school age child, at the beginning of each day, what you should do is, before they go on, make a schedule for them. You can either, some people have invested in whiteboards. Some people do a really pretty written schedule. At this time, this is what you're going to do. At this time, this is what you're going to do. And so that way it's right there in front of them. They don't have to go through the program, because a lot of the schools, you go on and then you go off for half an hour. You go off for 45 minutes. Or, Mondays you have morning meeting, but on Wednesdays you don't have morning meeting. Mm-hmm. So how do I navigate that? Because I don't know what to expect every day. So if parents can take 5 minutes at the beginning of each day and do that for the kids, that's really helpful. Another thing that's really helpful is, if you're a parent and you have a school age child, schedule in breaks during the day. So morning meeting, 8:50 to 9:20. Okay, so now I've got a 15 to 20 minute break. Run around the house, do jumping jacks, whatever it is that you want to do that's not on a screen, that gets some activity out.
Yeah.
Schedule in times in the day when they should be doing their independent work. Because one thing that I've found a lot of families will say is, well, they're logging into all their classes. They seem to be listening to the teacher. The teacher seems to think they get it. But then at the end of the day, I say, where's their work? And they say, oh, I didn't know when to do it. And they're not avoiding it. They just need someone to say, okay, at this time. Mm-hmm. The other thing that parents can do that's really helpful is, if they can print out all of the work ahead of time, instead of kind of catching up as the day goes on. Some teachers will send out everything for the week. And so if you can print it out for the week and then sort of put it in each day by day in front of your child, that's helpful for them too. Basically, you become their executive functioning, or in other words, you become their administrative assistant to help them get through their day. I also always recommend lots of reward charts to help them get through their day. So if they make it on time to all of their classes, if they make it on time and finish their work, then they get some sort of special experiential reward. Mm-hmm. We're not buying toys on a daily basis. I think we've all learned that this is going to go on for a while. And so the people who are promising things in March maybe kind of either gave up or spent a tremendous amount of money. So, you want things to have some sort of intrinsic value to the kids, mm-hmm. and not solely rely on that extrinsic value. But at times, they're kids and they need to get through. So the reward could be something like special alone time without a sibling, or, gee, after dinner, instead of kind of logging back into work or everyone going in their separate ways, we're going to play a special game together. I had one family do a reward chart that I loved, and I would like them to come over to my house, where if everything was completed by the end of the week, the dad would make sushi for everybody.
Nice.
So, kind of making that list with your kids of what they're interested in, what's experiential, what's fun, what's motivating, and then switching those rewards up every few weeks is really key. Everybody wants to earn rewards and everybody wants to get praised.
Definitely. And I think something really important that you highlight is the importance of making that really clear, explicit, and visual, so that there's a consistent everything that is happening at the home. I think, one of the really frustrating things during this whole time is that parents have to essentially become teachers, for better or worse, at home. And so many of the things that help to create the structure for the day for students in the classroom, like the visual calendar that sort of lays out what's going to happen every single day, and the movement breaks that are built into the classroom experience, and the reward charts to help students get through the tasks that teachers know will be really challenging. Parents, for better or worse, are going to become far more skilled in doing all of those things if they kind of want to get through all of this. So I think all of those recommendations are really, really helpful. And, the common theme, I think, is just like visual structure and breaks, because we all need breaks. Zoom is exhausting for all of us, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's a lot of kids will say, okay, I'm done with the Zoom break. I'm going to play Among Us. I'm going to go on to Gotcha Life. I'm going to go on to Roblox or Minecraft, but that doesn't really give you the break that you need.
Yeah.
Because it's not a break from the screen. And that physical activity is really important too.
Yeah. So I think when we post this on our blog, we can also include some recommendations for off-screen physical activities that make for a nice break from the screen, because, we all need it.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for all of your helpful comments and guidance, which I know all of our families will really, really appreciate. So thank you again for taking the time.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Nice.
Bye-bye.
Bye.